In the pages of history, few kings have carved a path of bloodshed as long and wide as England's Henry VIII. The man who would come to be one of the most terrifying rulers in memory did not seize power through war or uprising. He simply inherited it. Yet what he chose to do with that inherited crown would twist him from a dazzling Renaissance prince into a tyrant whose name alone still makes the blood run cold. When Henry Tudor claimed the throne in 1509, England was only just crawling out of the ruin left by decades of civil war. The Wars of the Roses had ripped the realm apart, and the Tudor dynasty remained fragile, still scrambling for unquestioned legitimacy. His father, Henry VII, had taken the crown by steel and cunning. But the young prince who became Henry VIII appeared marked for a very different kind of greatness. Tall, powerfully built, and brilliantly clever, he embodied everything a Renaissance monarch was meant to be. The England of 1509 craved both peace and splendor. The Middle Ages were fading, the Renaissance dawning, and the courts of Europe were turning into dazzling hubs of art, scholarship, and intrigue. Henry knew that to be truly great, a king had to radiate power at home and across the continent. What he either failed to grasp or simply refused to care about was the terrible cost others would pay for his dreams. From his first days on the throne, Henry revealed an all-consuming hunger for immortal legacy. Merely being another English king was never enough. He demanded to be seen as mighty, irresistible, eternal. That hunger would steer every great choice of his life, from his 6 marriages and religious upheaval to the rivers of blood he spilled in pursuit of greatness. His young court glittered with Tudor magnificence, packed with lords, thinkers, and artists drawn from all over Europe. Yet under that shining Renaissance surface lurked something far darker, a creeping paranoia and cold-blooded cruelty that would one day swallow everyone near him. Henry's charm and sharp mind hid a ruthless calculator who saw people as nothing more than pieces to move or throw away. As we follow the life of Henry VIII, we will see that his story is far more than royal extravagance and marital chaos. It is the grim warning of how absolute power can rot a soul completely, turning a bright young king into a despot whose terror lasted almost 40 years. The Golden Prince who began the reign ended it a rotting, suspicious beast, deserted by the very empire he had raised on the corpses of his enemies. What chills the blood most is how calmly and systematically he ruined lives while wearing the mask of godly kingship. Every execution, every betrayal, every cruelty he justified to himself as vital for England's good. By the time his rule ended, thousands had perished to stroke his vanity, and the nation itself was scarred forever by his fixations. The road to total power started with Henry's frantic need for a son. In the 16th century, dynasties lived or died by the strength of their male line, and Henry knew that without a boy, the Tudor house could collapse. That need drove him to marry 6 times, but far worse, it gave him license in his own mind to crush anyone blocking his path. Catherine of Aragon, his first queen, possessed every quality a consort should have: devout, clever, politically shrewd. She had first been wed to Henry's elder brother Arthur before the prince died, and her marriage to Henry was intended to bind England to Spain. For almost 20 years she was his queen, yet she committed one sin Henry could never forgive. She did not bear a living son. Henry's craving to divorce Catherine was never just personal, it was dynastic. By the 1520s he had persuaded himself that God was cursing him for marrying his brother's widow, ignoring the papal permission that had allowed the match. In his mind, heaven's anger explained why Catherine's pregnancies ended in stillbirths or early deaths, except for their daughter Mary. When Pope Clement VII refused to annul the marriage, Henry stood at a crossroads that would shape everything to come, bow to Rome or shatter its hold forever. For a man drunk on absolute power, the choice was never in doubt. The English Reformation did not spring from deep faith. It sprang from Henry's refusal to accept any power above his own. The break with Rome in 1534 was the moment Henry stopped being merely king and started becoming tyrant. By naming himself supreme head of the Church of England, he crowned himself God's voice on earth inside his kingdom. This was not just politics, it was pure megalomania. Now he could make laws, wage wars, and decide the eternal fate of every soul under him. Thomas More, brilliant scholar and former Lord Chancellor, saw exactly what Henry was turning into. More's refusal to swear to the king's supremacy was not only about religion. It was about denying that any human being should hold such limitless power. His execution in 1535 was the first time Henry killed a man whose only offense was refusing to feed the royal ego. Thomas More's death echoed across Europe. A figure admired everywhere for wisdom and honor was butchered simply for not bowing low enough. More's murder was not just killing, it declared that Henry's win now outranked faith, conscience, and law itself. With Catherine shoved aside and the Church of England in his pocket, Henry could finally chase Anne Boleyn. The woman who had bewitched him was everything Catherine was not. Young, lively, apparently fertile. Henry's pursuit of Anne had already lasted years and forced him to rip his kingdom's religion apart. Anne Boleyn knew the deadly dance she had joined. She had seen how ruthlessly he discarded Catherine and understood that royal love could flip to royal hatred in a heartbeat. Still, she grasped the enormous power her hold over the king gave her. For a while she played the game masterfully, installing allies in high places and pushing the Protestant cause forward. Henry and Anne married in secret in 1533, while his marriage to Catherine was not yet officially dissolved. That hidden wedding said everything about Henry's nature. He would commit bigamy to take what he wanted, then twist the law afterward to bless it. Law did not bind him, he bent it. When Anne bore Elizabeth in September 1533, Henry's disappointment was obvious. Another girl, another failure. The king who had turned the world upside down for Anne now began eyeing her as the next roadblock to a son. The woman who had been his grand passion was turning into his grand regret. Anne's later miscarriages only fed his growing bitterness. By 1536 he had convinced himself his second marriage was cursed just like the first. The same twisted logic that broke England from Rome now turned on the woman he had once adored. Anne Boleyn, who had soared so high, was about to crash lower than anyone thought possible. The accusations leveled against Anne Boleyn in 1536 were so wild they exposed the full madness of Henry's cruelty and fear. Charged with sleeping with several men, including her own brother, she faced claims almost certainly invented. The king who once sent her passionate letters now staged her ruin with the same icy precision he had used on Thomas More. Anne Boleyn's trial was a farce, the verdict decided before it began. Evidence was thin, witnesses bought or terrified, the whole affair rushed through at breakneck speed. Yet the fact that an English queen could even be tried for treason and adultery delivered a chilling warning. No one, no matter how exalted or once beloved, was safe from Henry's rage. Anne's beheading on the 19th of May 1536 took Henry's brutality to a new depth. His queen of barely 3 years died beneath a French swordsman's blade, a supposed kindness because it was faster than an axe. While Anne knelt at the scaffold in the Tower, Henry was already scheduling his next wedding for the following day. The breathless speed from execution to new marriage laid bare the frozen calculation inside him. There was no mourning, no pause, no regret. Anne's death was merely one more step on the endless road to a son. Her life had become nothing but a failed attempt. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, seemed to be exactly what the king now thought he needed. Unlike strong-willed Catherine and fiery Anne, Jane was gentle, quiet, and obedient. She had watched what happened to the others and knew survival meant total surrender to Henry's will. Her chosen motto, bound to obey and serve, summed up her strategy with the ever more tyrannical king. In October 1537 Jane finally gave Henry the son he had torn the kingdom apart to get, Edward VI. Joy exploded across the court. After nearly 30 years and multiple wives, the Tudor line looked safe. Yet triumph turned to tragedy when Jane died just 12 days later, probably from childbirth complications. Her death hit Henry harder than the falls of Catherine or Anne, perhaps because she had delivered the one thing he wanted most. For once he appeared to feel real grief instead of just thwarted rage. Even that grief, though, was filtered through his obsession with dynasty. In his eyes Jane died a heroine because she had done her duty. In the years after Jane, Henry's paranoia soared higher than ever. The king who once strode confidently now saw enemies in every shadow. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a huge northern rebellion, had shaken his faith in his people's loyalty. His answer was savage: hundreds hanged or worse, a blunt lesson that any defiance would be crushed. Thomas Cromwell, the genius who had engineered the break with Rome, became the next sacrifice to Henry's growing instability. Cromwell had brokered the king's disastrous fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves, and Henry's humiliation demanded a scapegoat. The man who had served loyally for over 10 years was beheaded in 1540, his head spiked on London Bridge as a reminder. Cromwell's fall was a watershed. Henry was no longer content to kill only open enemies, now even his most gifted servants could die for one mistake. Being close to power offered no shield, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. By the 1540s Henry had fully become the monster his earlier years had promised. The dashing, athletic youth of 1509 was now a swollen, sick despot who governed by terror. His court had turned into a place where one wrong word could mean the block, and his subjects lived in dread of catching his eye. The pattern of his marriages had settled into a grim rhythm. Obsession, wedding, disappointment, annihilation. Anne of Cleves was lucky; she accepted annulment and a fat pension instead of death. But Catherine Howard, wife number 5, would not escape. Her youth and beauty had caught the aging king's eye, but supposed affairs, real or invented, doomed her. Catherine Howard's execution in 1542 proved Henry had learned nothing. Again a young woman died for the king's fears and failures. The charges rested mostly on her premarital love life and rumored liaisons while queen. Evidence was shaky, the trial a rush job, the end inevitable. The brutality shocked even Henry's hardened circle. She was scarcely 20 when the axe fell, her real crime youth and naivety rather than treason. Yet Henry felt no pity, no sense that he himself had thrust a teenager into a deadly trap. She was just another body on the pile. Catherine Parr, sixth and last wife, knew exactly what deadly ground she walked when she married Henry in 1543. She had studied the fates of 5 previous queens and resolved to outlive him. Her plan was straightforward: total obedience and never touching the topics that set off his paranoia. Henry's final years saw his body and mind collapse together. The athletic young king had become a grotesque, stinking wreck, probably diabetic, failing kidneys, perhaps syphilitic. His leg ulcers festered so badly the stench reached other rooms, his mood swung widely and violently. As his flesh failed, his suspicion became absolute. The king, once ringed by friends, now trusted no one fully. Even careful Catherine Parr was nearly burned for heresy in 1546, only grovelling saved her from joining the list of executed wives. Henry's last years exposed the full nightmare he had become. The court that once awed Europe was now a nest of whispers and dread. Nobles who once scrambled for royal notice now prayed to escape it, knowing favor could flip to fury in an instant. One man's limitless power and bottomless ego had warped the entire nation. By 1546 Henry was grotesque beyond description. Accounts speak of a man so bloated he was hoisted by winches, his once handsome face puffed and pitted, his body reeking from pus-filled sores. Servants approached trembling. His gluttony had grown monstrous too. Unable to move, he gorged endlessly while his people starved amid the chaos of his reforms. His relationships with his children showed how warped his priorities were. He had obsessed over a son for decades yet barely knew young Edward, raised by others. Mary and Elizabeth were declared legitimate or bastard in whatever way suited politics that week. The terror went deeper than the dead. A whole generation of nobles grew up terrified of their own king, knowing one careless sentence could kill. England learned to live in suspicion. The culture of fear would long outlive Henry. Foreign envoys in his final years wrote reports that sound like visits to a madhouse. The king who once played popes and emperors against each other had become a pariah, unpredictable, repulsive, dangerous even to allies. His frantic quest for sons had only sown succession chaos, conflicting claims, religious rifts, weakened dynasty. As 1547 began, it was clear Henry VIII was dying. The tyrant who had haunted England for almost 40 years was finally losing to the rot inside him. Yet even bedridden he remained lethal, signing death warrants to the end. His last days were spent at Windsor amid the symbols of power he worshipped. Attendants described a pitiful, reeking hulk whose body had betrayed him as thoroughly as he had betrayed others. The stench from his legs was unbearable. His mind clung to the delusion that he had been a great king, that history would praise rather than damn him. Even dying, cruelty defined him. His very last act was signing the death warrant of Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, executed days before the king himself died, a final pointless murder. On the 28th of January 1547 Henry VIII breathed his last, flesh-rotting while he still lived. Few deaths could have suited such a man better, slow, foul, degrading, a mirror of the deaths he handed out. The kingdom he left was bankrupt, torn by religion, wobbling politically. The strong crown he thought he built was actually cracked by his own excesses. 9-year-old Edward was far too young to steady it. Across Europe, behind polite condolences, rulers quietly rejoiced that the mad tyrant was gone. Henry's swollen corpse reportedly burst on the way to burial, a last grotesque flourish. His real legacy stretched far beyond the immediate wreckage. He changed England forever, planting seeds of religious hatred that would burn for centuries. A nation grew up believing absolute monarchy was natural, that the king's will was above God and man, a lesson later tyrants would profit from. Most bitterly ironic of all, his lifelong obsession with a male heir achieved nothing. Edward VI died young and childless. The daughters Henry had sidelined, bastardized, and ignored took the throne after him. The son he killed and tortured for ruled 6 short years. Elizabeth, the daughter he never wanted as heir, became England's glory. Henry VIII's story stands as an ice-cold warning of what happens when power has no leash and ego no limit. The dazzling prince who seemed born for greatness ended as a name that still freezes the blood 400 years later. Absolute power did not merely corrupt Henry, it devoured him and everyone near him, leaving ruins that took generations to rebuild. In the end he got exactly what he craved, total power, godlike religious authority, and undying fame. But the fame is that of terror, not triumph, the eternal cautionary tale of a king who proved that unchecked power and boundless vanity destroy everything they touch.